My husband had twins with my own best friend. I quietly signed the divorce papers. When he confidently returned to his parents' house to show off his new legacy, his mother turned pale, dropped her wineglass, and asked a single question that destroyed his entire life. She asked if that woman still had not told him the truth. My name is Caroline, 34 years old, and a commercial cinematographer. I have spent my entire career framing the perfect shot, orchestrating complex lighting and capturing precise moments on film. Yet I somehow failed to see the ultimate betrayal developing right in front of my own lens. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who thought they could break you. I stepped out of the elevator on the top floor of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The VIP maternity ward did not smell or feel like a hospital. It smelled of expensive lavender diffusers and fresh-cut orchids. The walls were painted a calming slate blue, and the lighting was perfectly diffused, casting a warm, flattering glow over the expensive artwork lining the corridor. As an art director, my brain automatically registered the lighting setup. It was intentionally designed to make everyone look soft, peaceful, and glowing. I walked down the long, quiet hallway, my heels sinking slightly into the thick plush carpet. I carried a heavy manila folder in my right hand. The thick paper scratched against my palm, anchoring me to reality. The weight of that folder felt like the only real thing in a world that had suddenly mutated into a nightmare. My heart beat in a steady, slow rhythm. I was not hyperventilating. I was not shaking. A strange, chilling calm had settled deep into my bones the moment the private investigator handed me the final report 2 hours prior. I knew exactly what I was walking into, but seeing it with my own eyes was a different experience entirely. Room 412. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I did not need to push it open immediately. Through the narrow 2-inch gap, I could hear the low, intimate murmur of voices. I paused, resting my free hand flat against the cool wood of the doorframe. Through that sliver of space, I saw them perfectly framed. My husband Bradley stood in the center of the spacious recovery suite. He was wearing his tailored navy blue suit, the exact one I had purchased for him to celebrate his recent promotion at his real estate development firm. He leaned affectionately over the adjustable hospital bed. Propped up against a mountain of pristine white pillows was Simone, my absolute best friend of 10 years. The woman who had borrowed my clothes, who had cried on my shoulder over her string of failed relationships, and who had stood beside me raising a glass of champagne to toast my marriage on my wedding day. Simone looked exhausted but radiant. Wrapped in her arms were two tiny, tightly swaddled bundles, twins. Bradley reached down with a gentleness I had not seen from him in years. He brushed a stray strand of dark hair behind Simone's ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Then he leaned in and pressed a long, tender kiss to her forehead. He pulled back and looked down at the two sleeping babies with an expression of pure, unadulterated pride. It was the specific, arrogant pride a man reserves for his greatest personal conquest. It was the exact look he used when he closed a massive commercial property deal, only magnified 100 times over. The harsh reality of his obsession with legacy was suddenly glaringly obvious. For years, Bradley had been consumed by the idea of an heir, an alpha male passing down his empire regardless of the emotional cost to the people around him. And Simone, ever the opportunist, had seized the perfect chance to elevate her lifestyle by providing exactly what he demanded. I stood alone in the hallway, letting the brutal reality wash over me. Any normal person might have screamed. Any normal wife might have kicked the door open, hurled accusations, demanded explanations, or collapsed onto the floor in a puddle of uncontrollable tears. But I did not feel like crying. My demanding career had trained me to separate my personal emotions from the scene playing out in front of the lens. You observe, you analyze the subjects, you find the focal point, and you execute the plan. Bradley and Simone were completely unaware of their audience. They were entirely trapped in their own narcissistic bubble, whispering sweet, validating praises about their beautiful new family. I listened to my husband tell my best friend how strong she was, how perfect she was, and how she had finally given him the one thing he had always wanted. The implication hung heavy in the air. She had given him what his infertile, broken wife could not. I pushed the heavy oak door open. It swung inward silently on its well-oiled hinges. I stepped into the room, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an absolute void. The soft click of the door latch engaging behind me was the only sound that alerted them to my presence in the suite. Bradley snapped his head up instantly. His hand froze in midair, hovering just above Simone's shoulder like a statue. Simone gasped sharply, instinctively, pulling the two tightly wrapped blankets closer to her chest. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost fading against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes went wide with pure terror. The silence that stretched between us was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and entirely suffocating. I did not blink. I did not shout. I simply looked at Bradley. I looked at the man I had shared a home, a bed, and a life with for the past 6 years. He stood paralyzed by shock, his jaw slightly open, his eyes wide with the sudden violent realization that his carefully curated double life had just collided head-on with reality. Then I shifted my cold gaze to Simone. She physically shrank back into the pillows, completely unable to meet my eyes. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her chest heaving under the hospital gown. She stared down at the babies, refusing to look at the woman she had betrayed in the most profound way possible. I walked slowly toward the foot of the hospital bed. Every single step I took was deliberate, measured, and completely silent. Bradley opened his mouth, perhaps attempting to formulate a lie, perhaps preparing to launch into a defensive gaslighting rage, but the sheer freezing coldness radiating from me seemed to paralyze his vocal cords. He could not form a single word. I watched his eyes dart from my face to the folder, his confident posture crumbling under the weight of his own guilt. The room that had been filled with joyous whispers just moments before was now a suffocating chamber of their own making. I reached the edge of the mattress. The crisp white linens were perfectly smooth at the corners. I raised my right hand, holding the thick manila folder over the bed. I slowly relaxed my fingers and let the folder slip from my grasp. It landed on the mattress with a dull, heavy thud. The sound echoed in the quiet, expensive VIP suite, like a gavel coming down in an empty courtroom, signaling the absolute end of our lives together. The heavy folder lay untouched for a long moment. Bradley stared at it as if it were a live explosive. Simone remained paralyzed against her pillows, gripping the blankets wrapped around the two newborns. The pristine silence of the VIP recovery suite was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the medical monitors. I did not cross my arms or shift my weight. I stood holding my posture with the exact precision I used when setting up a commercial shoot. I watched them process the reality of the situation. "Open it," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of anger or hysteria. It sounded just like I was asking an assistant to pass me a simple black lens cap. Bradley blinked, the initial shock wearing off, replaced by a defensive posture. He puffed out his chest and flipped open the manila cover. He expected photos, screenshots of text messages, or hotel receipts. He expected the typical ammunition of a scorned wife looking for a screaming match. Instead, he found thick legal paper stacked neatly inside. The top document was a petition for dissolution of marriage. I had signed on the petitioner line in bold black ink. There was no demand for alimony or spousal support. There was no fight over our assets. Bradley then flipped to the second document, his brow furrowing in confusion. It was a quitclaim deed. I had fully executed and notarized the transfer of my entire interest in our $1.2 million suburban estate directly to him. I was handing him the luxury house totally free and clear, without a single solitary argument. I watched his eyes scan the legal jargon. I watched his brain try to comprehend why a betrayed woman was walking away and leaving him with the keys to a mansion. The confusion on his face lasted only a few seconds. Soon the gears in his narcissistic mind began to turn, processing this information not as a tactical retreat, but as an absolute victory for him. He believed I was surrendering because I was too weak to fight. A slow, highly arrogant smirk rapidly spread across his face. He dropped the legal documents onto the bed and let out a short laugh. The physical tension in his shoulders vanished entirely. He looked at me not with guilt, but with overwhelming pity, mixed with cruel satisfaction. "You are just giving up right now," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You simply never had the stomach for a real fight, Caroline." Simone whimpered softly from the bed, but Bradley ignored her. He took a step toward me, towering over me to exert his physical dominance. He wanted me to shrink away. He wanted me to cry. He wanted the validation of my emotional destruction. "Let us be completely honest," Caroline Bradley sneered, his voice dropping into a cruel whisper. "This marriage was over 3 years ago. You know it. I know it. You cannot blame me for stepping outside to find what you could never give me. I am a successful man. I am building a real estate empire. A man needs a family. He needs a bloodline. He needs a legacy to pass his wealth down to." He gestured toward Simone and the sleeping twins. Simone gave me exactly that. She gave me 2 totally healthy children. She proved my own male strength. You gave me absolutely nothing but bills. The cruelty of his words was designed to shatter me. He was deliberately weaponizing the most painful experience of my life. 3 years ago, when the fertility specialist delivered the devastating news that natural conception was impossible, I had wept until I could barely breathe. Bradley was using that deep trauma to justify his betrayal. "You are a broken woman." Caroline Bradley continued, his ego inflating with every vicious syllable he spat at me. "You are defective. What kind of alpha male stays with a wife who cannot even fulfill her basic biological purpose?" I needed a real woman. I needed someone who could stand beside me and build a future, not just pretend to play house. "Look at them." He pointed at the babies. "That is my blood. That is my future. You were just a placeholder until I found someone capable of giving me what I truly deserve." He crossed his arms, standing tall and victorious. He truly believed he had won. He got the girl. He got the newborn kids, he got the $1 million house, and he got rid of the sterile wife without having to spend a single dime on litigation. He was the absolute king of his own twisted universe, waiting for the peasant to bow her head and weep. But I did not weep at all. I did not scream. I did not even flinch. The stark contrast between his desperate need to inflict pain and my eerie calmness was absolute. It was the kind of silence that unnerves a predator. My heart rate remained completely steady. I looked right at his smug face, and I felt absolutely nothing. No heartbreak at all, no painful longing, no betrayal. I just felt the cold, hard certainty of the plan I had set in motion. I let his cruel words hang in the heavy air of the hospital room. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He was waiting for a reaction he was never going to get. I tilted my head slightly and offered him a polite, chilling smile. I looked past him, acknowledging Simone, who was trembling against the headboard, terrified by my total lack of emotion. I looked at the twins, wrapped tightly in their blankets. Then I looked right back into Bradley's bright blue eyes. I did not defend my womanhood. I did not defend my worth. I simply gestured toward the thick manila folder resting on the crisp white sheets. "Just make sure you sign all the pages, Bradley," I said, my voice smooth and untroubled as glass. Bradley scoffed at my smooth tone, clearly agitated that his grand speech had failed to draw a single tear from my eyes. He wanted a screaming match. He wanted me to fall to my knees and beg for an explanation. My refusal to play the devastated wife was visibly getting under his skin. Before he could launch into another tirade about his superior genetics, the heavy oak door creaked open behind me. A hospital administrator stepped into the room holding a sleek clipboard. She wore a tailored gray suit and offered a polite professional smile, completely unaware of the intense emotional crossfire she had just interrupted. She apologized for the intrusion, and explained that she needed to collect the final birth registration paperwork before her shift ended. She walked directly past me and approached Bradley. She handed him a specific stack of blue forms. The administrator pointed to the top page and informed him that this was the official acknowledgement of paternity. She explained that since he and Simone were not legally married, he needed to sign this document in the presence of a hospital witness to be legally established as the father of the newborn twins. Bradley snatched the clipboard from the administrator with an aggressive theatrical flourish. He did not read a single line of the fine print. He did not ask any questions about the legal ramifications of the document he was holding. His chest puffed out as he grabbed the sleek silver pen from the administrator. He looked right at me, his blue eyes flashing with a toxic mix of triumph and malice. He wanted to make absolutely sure I was watching this exact moment. He wanted me to witness him claiming his new family, his new bloodline, his ultimate legacy. He wanted this to be the final crushing blow to my self-esteem. "Watch closely. Caroline," he sneered, positioning the tip of the pen over the signature line. "This is what a real man does. He builds a family. He claims his heirs. You are looking at the future of my real estate empire right here on this bed." I kept my face entirely blank, but internally my mind was racing with sheer exhilaration. I watched the silver pen glide across the blue paper. I watched him press down hard, carving his name into the legal document with forceful, arrogant strokes. He signed his full legal name. He dated it. He handed the clipboard back to the administrator with a smug, self-satisfied grin. The administrator checked the signature, thanked him, and quietly exited the room, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just facilitated his absolute financial ruin. By signing that specific piece of paper, Bradley had just legally bound himself to those two children for the next 18 years. He had locked himself into a legal cage of his own making, driven entirely by his desperate need to prove his masculinity and humiliate me. He turned his attention back to me, expecting me to finally break. He expected the reality of his signature to be the catalyst for my breakdown. Simone was still clutching the swaddled babies, watching me with wide, fearful eyes, anticipating an explosion. Instead, I smoothed the front of my tailored blazer. I looked at the divorce papers resting on the mattress, then up at Bradley, and finally at Simone. I let a small, polite smile touch the corners of my mouth. It was the kind of bright, empty smile you give a stranger at a networking event. "Congratulations to you both," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady in the quiet room. "I genuinely wish you everything you deserve." With that, I turned on my heel. I did not look back. I did not wait for his response. I simply walked out of the room, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against the polished floor of the corridor. I walked past the nurse's station, past the waiting area filled with anxious families, and stepped into the elevator. The stainless steel doors slid shut, cutting off the sights and smells of the maternity ward. I pressed the button for the parking level and watched the floor numbers count down. The entire sequence of events had played out exactly as I had choreographed it in my mind. There were no unpredictable variables, no unexpected bursts of emotion to derail my strategy. I had remained the director of my own reality, calling the shots while they played their foolish parts. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the basement, echoing my own sense of absolute finality. I stepped out into the total silence of the underground parking garage. The cool, damp air of the concrete structure was a welcome relief. I walked to my car, a sleek black Tesla parked in a secluded corner spot. The car unlocked automatically as I approached. I opened the heavy door, slid into the premium leather driver's seat, and shut the door firmly, sealing myself inside the quiet cabin. I let out a long, slow breath. The tension finally drained from my shoulders, replaced by a surging wave of adrenaline. I reached across the center console and pressed the button to open the glove box. The compartment dropped open smoothly. Reaching inside, I pushed aside the vehicle registration and a spare pair of sunglasses. My fingers brushed against a thick, worn envelope. I pulled it out and rested it on my lap. It was a yellowed medical folder, the edges frayed from age and careful handling. I had spent weeks tracking down this specific document, digging through old medical records just to confirm my devastating theory. Across the front, a faded label read, Pediatric Archive 2003. I traced the faded letters with my index finger. Bradley thought he had secured his legacy, but he had no idea what was actually inside this folder. He had no idea what I had discovered. I leaned my heavy head back against the dark headrest and finally smiled. The studio was a cavernous expanse of polished concrete and suspended lighting grids, a perfectly controlled environment where I dictated every single shadow and highlight. 2 days had passed since the hospital encounter. I stood on the soundstage, carefully threading a heavy macro lens onto a high-end cinema camera. You rotate the barrel, adjust the aperture, and everything blurry suddenly sharpens into crystal-clear focus. I leaned forward, peering through the viewfinder to check the framing on a luxury watch commercial we were shooting that afternoon. My phone vibrated against the metal surface of the workstation, breaking my deep concentration. The caller ID flashed brightly across the screen. It was Beatrice. I knew exactly what this call was going to be, a masterclass in shifting blame and toxic suburban morality. I answered on speaker, keeping my hands free to adjust the complex camera rig. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. A heavy performative sigh echoed through the speaker. "Caroline. Dear," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "I was hoping we could have a mature conversation about this whole mess. You are probably emotional right now, but we must look at the bigger picture." I replied. "I am perfectly calm, Beatrice." She did not hesitate to dive right into the trap. "Bradley told us that you dropped off divorce papers at the hospital. Honestly, you are being incredibly dramatic. Men are biologically driven, dear. A man like my son, an alpha male, building a real estate empire, needs to spread his seed. He needs a legacy to carry on his name. You cannot possibly fault him for fulfilling a basic biological imperative when your own body simply failed to do the job." Her words bounced right off my emotional armor. I gently wiped a speck of dust from the lens glass. "Go on," I prompted smoothly. "Simone is simply a better fit for the family image going forward," Beatrice continued. "She knows how to host, how to dress, and how to operate within our specific social circles. The women on the homeowner association board already adore her online content. You are always so obsessed with your little camera projects, constantly hiding behind the scenes in dark studios. Simone steps into the light. She elevates Bradley. She gives him the perfect family portrait that a man of his caliber absolutely requires." I let her words hang in the studio air. She was openly endorsing my husband having children with my best friend because it looked better for her country club reputation. "I am glad you found a daughter-in-law who meets your rigorous aesthetic standards," I replied evenly. Beatrice let out a small, satisfied hum. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable about this, Caroline. Do not try to ruin his joy with messy legal battles. Just step aside gracefully. The family will appreciate your discretion." I ended the call without another word. I tapped my screen, saving the recorded conversation to a secure cloud folder. Her toxic words were safely archived, ready to be deployed when the timing was absolutely perfect. Before I could even step away from the workstation, the phone vibrated again. This time it was Rachel, Bradley's younger sister. She had always worshipped her brother, fully enabling his worst narcissistic traits. I put her on speaker just like her mother. Caroline, Rachel snapped immediately. "Mom just said you hung up on her. You have absolutely no right to act like the victim here." "I am listening, Rachel," I said. "You knew this marriage was falling apart," Rachel argued, her tone filled with self-righteous anger. "Bradley has been miserable for years trying to accommodate your career while you refuse to give him a family." Simone actually stepped up. "She gave him what he deserves. You should be apologizing to him for forcing him to look elsewhere for happiness." The sheer audacity of the gaslighting was fascinating to witness. They were completely rewriting history to cast Bradley as a tragic hero and me as the cold, neglectful villain. "You are acting like a bitter, jealous ex," Rachel continued relentlessly. "Bradley is providing for those twins. He is buying Simone a gorgeous new house in the best school district. He is doing the honorable thing. You throwing divorce papers at him in the hospital was just a pathetic attempt to steal his spotlight. You need to back off and let them be happy. Simone is actually going to be a real mother, something you clearly know nothing about. The cruelty in her voice was palpable, but I simply smiled at the camera lens. I needed them to feel victorious. I needed them to believe I was completely defeated. Thank you for sharing your perspective, Rachel. I said, my voice completely devoid of any hurt or anger. I will be sure to keep your advice in mind. I disconnected the call and saved the second recording right next to the first one. They had handed me the exact ammunition I needed. They were so blinded by their arrogant need to protect their golden boy that they had openly admitted to endorsing his adultery and financial deceit. I picked up my phone and opened my secure messaging application. I now had all the audio proof of their highly toxic enabling. I had the deed to the house transferred. I had the pediatric archive folder safely locked in my personal safe. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly falling into place, interlocking with flawless, terrifying precision. They thought they had successfully pushed me out of their perfect suburban narrative. They thought they had buried me under the weight of their collective gaslighting. They had absolutely no idea that I was not retreating at all. I was simply moving behind the camera, setting up the perfect angle to capture their absolute destruction. The lighting was set, the focus was locked, the trap was fully primed and ready to snap shut without any single hesitation or mercy. The heavy, soundproof doors of the soundstage groaned open, breaking the profound silence I had just established. I turned away from the camera rig, expecting to see one of my lighting technicians returning early from their lunch break. Instead, Jamal stepped into the dim light of the studio. He was 34 years old, a highly successful corporate lawyer, and the only person in Bradley's entire extended family who possessed a shred of human decency. As an African-American man who had fought his way up from a working-class neighborhood to the top tier of the legal profession, Jamal had always seen right through the pretentious suburban entitlement that completely consumed his wife Rachel and her parents. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, but his tie was loosened, and he looked incredibly exhausted. He closed the heavy door behind him and walked slowly across the polished concrete floor, navigating around the heavy cables and light stands until he stood just a few feet away from my workstation. He did not offer a polite fake smile. He just looked at me with deep, genuine sorrow in his dark eyes. "I am so incredibly sorry," Caroline Jamal said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "I just heard the voicemail Rachel left on your phone, and I heard what Beatrice said to you. I was in the kitchen getting coffee when Rachel was practically screaming her toxic nonsense at you. I need you to know that I do not support a single word that came out of her mouth. Her behavior is absolutely reprehensible, and the way this entire family is treating you makes me sick to my stomach." I set down my lens cloth and looked at him. Jamal was a good man, trapped in a marriage that was rapidly souring due to the exact same narcissistic traits his wife shared with her brother. "Thank you, Jamal," I replied softly. "You are the only one who has shown me any grace today. I know you cannot control what Rachel does." He let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand over his short, cropped hair. "I tried to talk some sense into her," he explained, his tone heavy with frustration. "I told her that celebrating Bradley for destroying his marriage and having children with your best friend is disgusting. I told her that alienating you was a massive mistake. But she is completely brainwashed by Beatrice. They are all so desperate to protect Bradley and his fragile ego that they are willing to completely rewrite reality. I came down here because I could not stomach being in that house for one more second. I wanted to look you in the eye and apologize personally. You did not deserve any of what happened at that hospital." "I appreciate your honesty," I said, leaning against the edge of the metal cart. "It means a lot to know that I am not entirely crazy, that someone else sees how completely unhinged their reaction is right now." Jamal nodded, but his expression shifted. The warm, supportive brother-in-law retreated, and the sharp, analytical lawyer stepped forward. He glanced around the empty studio to ensure we were entirely alone. He pulled his leather briefcase off his shoulder and set it down on the table next to my camera equipment. He unclasped the brass locks with a sharp snap. I am not just here to apologize for my wife. Caroline, Jamal said, his voice dropping into a serious professional register. I am here because I discovered something last night, something you need to know immediately before you finalize any financial agreements with Bradley. He pulled out a stack of banking documents and slid them across the table toward me. I looked down at the paper. It was a printout of the joint savings account Bradley and I had maintained for emergency house repairs and future investments. I had not checked that specific account in a few weeks. When I looked at the highlighted balance at the bottom of the page, my eyes locked onto the number. The account, which should have held nearly $200,000, was almost completely empty. Bradley drained the account, Jamal stated bluntly. He withdrew exactly $150,000 yesterday morning. I was helping him review some corporate tax filings for his real estate firm, and I accidentally saw the transfer confirmation on his desk. He moved the money into a private individual checking account under his name only. I stared at the black and white numbers on the page. The sheer audacity of the theft was staggering. He took $150,000 without a single word of warning. Jamal tapped the paper with his index finger. He did not just move the money to hide it from you during the divorce proceedings, Caroline. I did some digging through his recent escrow files. He used that exact amount of cash to pay the non-refundable down payment on a massive new house in the gated suburban community his parents live in. He bought the house under Simone's name. The reality of his financial betrayal hung in the air. Bradley had stolen the money we had saved together, money I had largely contributed to from my commercial directing jobs, to buy a luxury home for his mistress and the newborn twins. He was literally using my hard-earned wealth to fund his new perfect suburban life. Jamal watched my face closely, clearly expecting me to shatter into a million pieces. He expected me to scream, to cry, to immediately call my divorce attorney in a blind panic. He knew how hard I had worked for that money. He knew the countless late nights I had spent on commercial sets to build that savings account. He thinks because you handed him the divorce papers so easily at the hospital, you are simply walking away from everything, Jamal explained, his tone urgent and deeply concerned. He is banking on the fact that you are too emotionally devastated to fight him for the cash. You need to file an emergency injunction right now, Caroline. You need to freeze his remaining assets before he funnels anything else to Simone. If we act quickly, my firm can help you secure a court order to claw that money back. It is blatant financial abuse. I stood perfectly still, letting his urgent words echo loudly through the large space of the studio. I looked down at the banking documents, tracing the printed numbers with my fingertip. Any typical wife would feel utterly destroyed by this brutal financial betrayal. Losing exactly $150,000 in a single day is a truly devastating financial blow. But my heart rate did not spike. My hands did not tremble. I slowly lifted my gaze from the papers and looked back into Jamal's concerned, exhausted eyes. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs, and let it out. I folded my hands together and rested them on the edge of the table. You are a truly excellent lawyer, Jamal, I said softly. Your dedication to uncovering the truth is remarkable. Then I laughed. It did not start as a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle. It erupted from my chest as a full, rich, and entirely genuine laugh that echoed off the high concrete ceilings of the soundstage. I threw my head back, the sound bouncing off the metal lighting grids overhead. Jamal took a sudden step backward. His professional lawyer facade completely crumbled, replaced by deep, visible alarm. His dark eyes widened, scanning my face as if looking for signs of a total psychological breakdown. He reached out a hand, hovering it over the table. Caroline, are you all right? Jamal asked, his voice thick with genuine concern. I know this is a massive shock. Losing that amount of cash on top of the betrayal at the hospital is enough to push anyone over the edge. We can get you some water. We can sit down and process this. I waved my hand, wiping a small tear of pure mirth from the corner of my eye. I took a deep breath to steady myself, though a wide smile remained firmly planted on my face. I am not having a breakdown, Jamal, I assured him, my voice steadying back into its usual calm rhythm. I am actually experiencing a moment of profound clarity. You came here to warn me about a financial disaster, and I deeply appreciate that. But you have to understand something about how I operate. I turned away from this camera rig and walked over to my main editing bay. The dual curved monitors illuminated the dark corner of the studio. You see, Bradley thinks in the short term. He thinks about immediate gratification, about flashing cash to impress people, and about securing a down payment for Simone to play house in the suburbs. He thinks he outsmarted me by draining the emergency fund. I tapped the space bar to wake up the computer. But I have spent my entire career looking at the long game. I frame the shot, I anticipate the movement, and I wait for the subject to step exactly into the focus zone. I opened a secure encrypted drive hidden behind several layers of complex passwords. I clicked on a specific subfolder and pulled up a highly confidential PDF document. I grabbed my wireless mouse and slid it across the desk, turning the large monitor so Jamal could see the screen perfectly clearly. Read that, I instructed. Jamal leaned over the desk. His eyes narrowed as his legal training instantly kicked in. He began scanning the dense bureaucratic paragraphs of the document. The silence in the studio stretched for a full minute. I watched his expression shift from confusion to realization and finally to absolute shock. He took off his suit jacket, tossed it onto a nearby chair, and leaned closer to the screen, as if he could not believe what he was reading. "This is an impending federal and state tax lien," Jamal said, his voice dropping to an astonished whisper. "And it is massive. It outlines severe penalties for mismanaged corporate funds, illegal commingling of business assets, and unreported income related to his commercial real estate development firm." "Exactly," I replied, crossing my arms. "Bradley has been playing fast and loose with his corporate accounts for the last 4 years. He thought he was a genius for hiding his money through various shell companies. What he did not know is that the IRS has been quietly auditing his firm for the past 8 months. They have uncovered everything. Every single fraudulent deduction, every hidden offshore account, and every fake vendor invoice." Jamal scrolled down to the second page of the document, his eyes darting across the text. "They are preparing to seize assets to cover the penalties," he noted, his finger tracing a specific paragraph on the screen. "And because he commingled his personal and business funds so heavily, the primary asset targeted for seizure is the $1.2 million suburban estate you two shared." I smiled again, tapping the edge of the monitor. "That brings us back to the hospital, Jamal. When I walked into that maternity ward, I did not just hand him divorce papers out of the goodness of my heart. I handed him a fully executed, notarized quitclaim deed. I legally signed away every single ounce of my ownership and interest in that property. I handed him the keys to the castle, and he took them without a single second of hesitation." Jamal stood up straight, staring at me as the full weight of my strategy finally clicked into place. His jaw literally dropped. "You transferred the house to him," Jamal said, pacing a small circle around the editing bay. "You legally severed yourself from the property right before the lien becomes public record. He thinks he bullied you into giving up $1 million asset for free. He thinks he won the ultimate real estate victory. He gleefully accepted full, undivided liability for a financial time bomb," I confirmed, my voice carrying a sharp, icy satisfaction. "By signing those papers to finalize the divorce and taking sole ownership of the estate, he assumed the entire burden of that impending tax lien. If I had fought him for the house, my own credit, my own studio, and my own assets would have been tangled up in his fraudulent mess for the next decade. The IRS would have dragged me down right alongside him. I had to let him take the house to protect my own wealth." Jamal ran a hand over his face, letting out a low, incredulous whistle. "The $150,000 he stole from the savings account," Jamal started, shaking his head. "It is a cheap price to pay for my absolute financial freedom," I finished for him. "He can take that cash and use it as a down payment for Simone's new house. Let him enjoy the illusion of his new perfect life for a few more weeks. Because when the federal government formally drops that lien, they are not just going to take the suburban estate. They are going to freeze his personal accounts." They are going to look into his recent transfers. They are going to see that he moved stolen funds into a new property under his mistress's name. They will seize her new house too. Jamal realized a slow smile finally breaking across his face. Simone thinks she just secured a wealthy provider. She thinks she trapped an alpha male who will fund her lifestyle influencer dreams forever. But he is dragging her directly into a federal tax investigation. By attempting to hide money in her name, he just made her an accessory to his financial crimes. Bradley built his entire ego around his wealth and his legacy, I stated calmly. He called me a broken woman because I could not give him an heir. He thinks those twins are his ultimate prize, but he is about to face the consequences of a man who builds his kingdom on quicksand. I gave him exactly what he wanted. I removed myself from his life and left him alone with his choices. Jamal looked at me with profound, newfound respect. You are terrifyingly brilliant, Caroline. I accepted the compliment with a brief nod. Jamal understood the psychological warfare behind it. He leaned against the table, crossing his arms, looking at the glowing monitors with respect. He knew the damage a federal tax lien could inflict. It was a suffocating anchor that would drag Bradley, his business, and anyone financially attached to him straight to the bottom. Jamal turned his attention back to me. His expression hardened into absolute resolve. He was stepping into his role as a legal powerhouse. Listen to me, Caroline, he said, his voice firm. When the IRS officially drops the hammer, Bradley is going to scramble. He will hire aggressive attorneys. He will claim you knew about the fraudulent accounts to pull you back into the liability pool. He will argue the house transfer was executed under false pretenses. You need an impenetrable defense wall. I know, I replied smoothly. That is exactly why I fast-tracked the divorce and kept my hands clean of his business ledgers for the past 4 years. That is a great start, Jamal countered. But you need active representation today. I am offering my services completely off the books and free of charge. I know the dirty tactics his firm will use. I will help you review every document, protect your commercial studio assets, and ensure federal agents see a clear line separating your clean money from his stolen cash. You will not navigate this fallout alone. I looked at him, moved by his loyalty. Jamal was risking his own domestic peace. If Rachel or Beatrice found out he was aiding my legal defense against their golden boy, his home life would turn into a miserable battlefield. You are risking a lot by helping me, Jamal, I warned him. Jamal let out a sharp, bitter sigh. My marriage is already a battlefield, Caroline. Rachel has chosen to align herself with a delusion. She and Beatrice would rather protect a cheating, corrupt narcissist than face the reality of who Bradley truly is. I took an oath to uphold the law and fight for justice. Standing by while they try to destroy you goes against everything I believe in. I am with you on this all the way to the end. We shook hands, sealing an unspoken pact. Having a brilliant legal mind on my side provided an extra layer of security I gladly accepted. However, as Jamal began detailing strategies to shield my production company from Bradley's upcoming audit, I held up my hand to stop him. I appreciate the legal shield, Jamal, I said, my voice dropping to a more dangerous register. The financial ruin is perfectly set. Losing the luxury estate, facing federal audits, and watching Simone lose her stolen down payment will definitely sting. But you have to understand something fundamental about my ex-husband. Bradley does not care about money the way normal people do. He views money simply as a tool to project his image. Jamal frowned, sensing the shift in my tone. What do you mean? I walked around the editing bay, stepping into the center of the studio. I want you to think about how Bradley spoke about those newborn twins at the hospital. I want you to remember the specific words Rachel and Beatrice used when they called to harass me today. They did not talk about love. They did not talk about family values. They talked about his legacy. They talked about his biological imperative to spread his seed. Bradley's entire existence, his ego is built on the foundation of being an untouchable alpha male. Jamal nodded slowly, tracking my logic. He always had to be the smartest, the strongest, and the most dominant guy in the room, Jamal agreed. He treats his new kids like trophies. Exactly, I stated. Financial ruin will damage his lifestyle, but it will not destroy his core identity. He will just play the victim, blame the government, and use those twins as props to garner sympathy. He will use them to prove he is still a potent, successful patriarch. To truly make him pay for weaponizing my pain, I have to dismantle the very foundation of his ego. The tax lien is just the appetizer, Jamal. The real vengeance lies completely with the twins. Jamal stood frozen. The ambient hum of the studio equipment seemed to amplify in the heavy silence. He looked at me, his legal mind working frantically to connect the dots. "What are you saying, Caroline? How can you possibly touch his custody rights if he already signed the acknowledgement of paternity?" I did not answer him with words. I turned and walked over to my heavy equipment case resting near the soundproof doors. I unzipped the front compartment and reached inside. My fingers closed around the thick, worn envelope I had retrieved from my Tesla earlier that day. I pulled it out, feeling the textured paper against my skin. I walked back to the editing bay and placed the envelope squarely on the metal table, pushing it across the smooth surface until it stopped directly in front of Jamal. It was the yellowed medical folder. The edges were frayed and the paper smelled faintly of old clinical archives. Across the front, the bold, faded black letters spelled out Pediatric Archive 2003. Jamal stared down at the cover. He did not touch it immediately. He looked at the date, doing the rapid mental math. 2003. Bradley would have been exactly 12 years old. Jamal looked up at me, his dark eyes searching my face for an explanation. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I kept my expression perfectly composed, but a fierce, triumphant energy coursed through my veins. "Open it and read the physician's summary," I instructed. "Read what happens when a 12-year-old boy contracts a severe, mismanaged case of the mumps. Read exactly why the alpha male legacy Bradley is currently bragging about is a complete biological impossibility." Jamal carefully opened the manila folder. His eyes scanned the aged medical jargon, moving rapidly down the page until he reached the final diagnostic conclusion highlighted at the bottom. His breath caught in his throat. He looked up at me, the color draining from his face as the sheer magnitude of the lie settled over him. To understand exactly how we reached this point of absolute deception, you have to go back exactly 3 years. The memory shifted me away from the cold concrete of my commercial studio and dropped me straight into the waiting room of the most exclusive fertility clinic in Los Angeles. The clinic did not feel like a medical facility. It looked like a high-end spa featuring plush white seating, cascading water features, and soft instrumental music, designed to mask the suffocating anxiety of wealthy couples desperate for children. I sat on a velvet sofa, gripping my leather handbag so tightly my knuckles turned white. We had been trying to conceive for over a year. The endless cycle of negative tests had taken a massive toll on my spirit. Today was the day we would receive the definitive results from our comprehensive reproductive workups. Bradley paced the length of the waiting room. He was not nervous about the medical news. He was annoyed by the inconvenience. He checked his gold watch repeatedly, letting out heavy sighs to ensure the reception staff knew his time was incredibly valuable. He treated the fertility appointment exactly the same way he treated a delayed flight or a slow valet service. A nurse dressed in tailored scrubs stepped through the frosted glass doors and softly called our names. I stood up, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached out to take Bradley by the hand, desperate for a reassuring squeeze. Right at that exact second, his cell phone erupted with a loud, obnoxious ringtone. Bradley looked at the screen. His eyes widened with immediate excitement. He held up a single index finger, gesturing for me to stop. "I cannot miss this," he announced, his voice booming across the quiet clinic. "It is the zoning board. We are about to close that commercial plaza deal. Go on inside and hear what the doctor has to say. Just text me the summary when you are done." I stared at him in disbelief. "Bradley," I pleaded softly, "this is about our future. We are getting our results right now. Please come inside with me." He was already walking backward toward the main exit. "Do not be overly emotional, Caroline," he scoffed, waving his phone in the air. "Time is money. You can handle a simple conversation with a doctor. I will be right out here in the hallway. He pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped outside. Through the thick glass, I watched him begin pacing the corridor, waving his free arm enthusiastically as he launched into his aggressive sales pitch. He completely abandoned me in the most vulnerable, terrifying moment of our entire marriage without a single glance backward. I swallowed the hard lump of humiliation in my throat and followed the nurse down the hall alone. The doctor sat behind a massive glass desk. His office was immaculate, lined with framed credentials and photos of smiling families. He looked up as I took the seat across from him. He immediately noticed I was completely alone. He offered a sympathetic smile, shifting a thick medical file to the center of his desk. I braced myself for the worst. I had spent the last 12 months convincing myself that I was the problem. Bradley had frequently suggested that my stressful career as a cinematographer was damaging my health and ruining our chances of starting a family. I waited for the doctor to confirm my deepest fears, preparing to accept the heavy burden of failure. The doctor opened the file and folded his hands together. "Caroline," he began, his tone gentle and highly professional. "We have extensively reviewed both of your test results. I want to start by reassuring you about your own reproductive health. Your hormone levels, your ovarian reserve, and your scans are all absolutely perfect. You are in excellent health." I let out a shaky breath, confusion instantly replacing my fear. If I was perfectly healthy, why were we failing month after month? I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the glass desk. "Then what is the problem, doctor?" I asked. The doctor let out a soft sigh and turned his monitor toward me. He pulled up a detailed laboratory report bearing Bradley's name. "The issue does not lie with you at all, Caroline," he explained slowly. "The issue lies entirely with your husband. We ran the seminal analysis twice to be absolutely certain of our findings. Bradley has a 0 sperm count. He is completely sterile." The room started to spin. The sterile white walls seemed to close in on me. "Sterile," I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Are you absolutely sure there is no treatment?" The doctor shook his head, his expression grim. He pulled a secondary document from the file. We dug into his pediatric medical history to understand the root cause. When Bradley was 12 years old, he contracted a severe case of the mumps. The virus caused a rare severe complication known as mumps orchitis. This condition causes intense inflammation and permanent irreversible damage to the reproductive organs. Because the infection was so severe during his crucial developmental years, it completely destroyed his ability to produce any sperm whatsoever. The damage is entirely permanent. There are no surgeries, no medications, and no procedures that can reverse a complication of this magnitude. It is a biological impossibility for Bradley to ever father a child naturally. I sat completely frozen in the quiet office chair, silently staring blankly at the irrefutable, devastating medical evidence that was permanently resting on the glass desk right before my own eyes. My mind struggled to process the sheer weight of the diagnosis. The man who constantly boasted about his masculine superiority, the man who blamed my career for our empty nursery, was completely incapable of ever giving me a child. I thanked the doctor, my voice sounding distant and hollow, and gathered the heavy medical file into my trembling hands. I walked out of the office expecting to find Bradley pacing the hallway, eager to hear the results. But the corridor was entirely empty. He had taken his business call and simply left the building, abandoning me to carry the emotional burden of our fertility journey completely alone. However, I was not alone for long. As I stepped toward the sleek elevator bank to leave the clinic, a manicured hand reached out and gripped my arm with surprising, desperate strength. I turned to see my mother-in-law, Beatrice. She had been tracking my medical appointments for months, obsessively monitoring our progress. She pulled me aggressively away from the open hallway and shoved me into a quiet, secluded alcove near the decorative water feature. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted around nervously to ensure no one was listening. "Caroline? Tell me the truth right now," Beatrice demanded, her voice a frantic, hushed whisper. "What did the doctor just tell you?" I looked at her, my eyes brimming with hot, confused tears. I held up the thick medical file. "It is Bradley." I said, my voice cracking under the emotional strain. He had a severe complication from the mumps when he was a child. The doctor said he is completely sterile. There is absolutely zero chance we can ever conceive. Beatrice did not gasp. She did not look shocked. Instead, a profound, terrifying panic washed over her sharp features. She grabbed both of my shoulders, her perfectly manicured acrylic nails digging painfully into my skin. She knew. I realized it in that exact second. She had always known about the childhood complication, and she had deliberately kept it a total secret. She had let me subject my body to endless invasive tests, hormone injections, and agonizing months of failure, all while knowing her son was the actual cause of our heartbreak. You cannot ever tell him, Caroline. Beatrice pleaded, her voice vibrating with a toxic, desperate intensity. You must listen to me right now. You know exactly how Bradley is. You know how much his entire identity revolves around his image. He is an alpha male. He thrives on dominance, on perfection, on projecting absolute strength to the entire world. If you tell him that he is the reason you two cannot have children, it will completely destroy him. His ego will shatter into a million irreparable pieces. It will ruin his confidence, his career, and your marriage. I stared at her, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her request. You want me to lie to my husband about his own medical reality? I asked, the words tumbling out in a state of pure disbelief. I want you to protect the man you promised to love. Beatrice countered fiercely, tightening her grip on my shoulders. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume suffocating me in the narrow alcove. If the truth comes out, he will spiral into a depression he will never recover from. But if you take the blame, if you tell him that your demanding career caused the issue or that your body just cannot carry a child, he will stay strong. He will comfort you. He will be the supportive husband you need. You can adopt later. But right now, you have to protect his pride. You are a strong woman, Caroline. You can carry this weight. He cannot. She spun a masterful, manipulative web of guilt and duty. She weaponized my deep, unwavering love for her son. At 29 years old, I was desperately in love and hopelessly naive. I genuinely believed that marriage meant protecting your partner from profound pain, even if it meant absorbing that pain yourself. I looked at Beatrice, feeling the crushing weight of her toxic expectation settling onto my chest. I nodded slowly, sealing my own miserable fate. I agreed to carry the heavy, suffocating stigma of being the broken woman. For 3 agonizing years, I swallowed that massive lie. I sat silently at family holiday dinners while Beatrice and Rachel made passive-aggressive comments about my ticking biological clock. I endured the pitiful looks from his extended relatives. I listened to Bradley make arrogant, cruel jokes about my stressful job ruining my reproductive system. I watched him build his massive ego on the foundation of my supposed biological failure. I took every single hit. I absorbed every single insult. I let them paint me as the defective wife because I believed I was protecting the fragile heart of the man I loved. I sacrificed my own dignity to preserve his pathetic, fragile illusion of absolute masculinity. The memory faded, snapping me violently back to the present reality of my polished concrete studio. The ambient hum of the heavy film equipment grounded me. I looked across the metal editing table at Jamal. He was still staring at the yellowed medical file, the horrifying truth of my 3-year sacrifice washing over him in real time. The contrast between the woman I was then and the woman standing before him now was absolute. The naive, accommodating, desperately loving wife, who had wept in that clinic alcove, was completely dead. She had been systematically murdered by 3 years of their relentless gaslighting and emotional abuse. In her place stood a cold, calculating commercial director who no longer dealt in emotions or blind loyalty. I had evolved into a woman who only operated in hard facts, strategic lighting, and undeniable, irrefutable evidence. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for Bradley anymore. The man who had mockingly called me broken while kissing his mistress in a hospital suite was about to learn the most painful lesson of his entire arrogant existence. I reached across the table and tapped the cover of the pediatric archive. They pushed me into the dark for 3 years, Jamal, I said, my voice ringing with a chilling metallic certainty. They thought I would just stay there and quietly accept my role as the family failure. They had no idea I was just adjusting my eyes to the shadows, waiting for the exact right moment to turn a massive blinding spotlight on their ultimate deception. Bradley wanted a legacy to prove his manhood. Now he has two screaming infants, a crushing federal tax lien, and a biological truth that is going to publicly obliterate his entire universe. My husband had twins with my own best friend. I quietly signed the divorce papers. When he returned to his parents' house, his mom turned pale and asked if she still had not told him the truth. My name is Caroline. I am 34 years old and I work as a commercial cinematographer. I have spent my career framing the perfect shot and capturing precise moments on film. Yet I failed to see the ultimate betrayal developing right in front of my own lens. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who thought they could break you. I stepped out of the elevator on the top floor of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The VIP maternity ward smelled of expensive lavender diffusers and fresh-cut orchids. The walls were painted a calming slate blue, casting a flattering glow over the expensive artwork lining the corridor. As an art director, my brain automatically registered the lighting setup. It was intentionally designed to make everyone look soft, peaceful, and glowing. I walked down the quiet hallway, my heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet. I carried a heavy manila folder in my right hand, the thick paper scratched against my palm, anchoring me to reality. My heart beat in a steady, slow rhythm. I was not shaking. A strange, chilling calm had settled deep into my bones the moment the private investigator handed me the final report 2 hours prior. I knew exactly what I was walking into. Room 412. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I did not need to push it open immediately. Through the narrow gap, I could hear the low, intimate murmur of voices. I paused, resting my free hand flat against the doorframe. Through that sliver of space, I saw them perfectly framed. My husband Bradley stood in the center of the spacious recovery suite. He was wearing his tailored navy blue suit, the exact one I had purchased for him to celebrate his recent promotion at his real estate development firm. He leaned affectionately over the adjustable hospital bed. Propped up against pristine white pillows was Simone, my absolute best friend of 10 years. The woman who had borrowed my clothes and who had raised a glass to toast my marriage. Simone looked exhausted but radiant. Wrapped in her arms were two tightly swaddled bundles, twins. Bradley reached down with a gentleness I had not seen from him in years. He brushed a stray strand of dark hair behind Simone's ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Then he leaned in and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. He pulled back and looked down at the sleeping babies with an expression of pure, unadulterated pride. It was the specific, arrogant pride a man reserves for his greatest personal conquest. For years, Bradley had been consumed by the idea of an heir, an alpha male passing down his empire. Simone, ever the opportunist, had seized the perfect chance to elevate her lifestyle by providing exactly what he demanded. I stood alone in the hallway, letting the brutal reality wash over me. Any normal wife might have kicked the door open, hurled accusations, demanded explanations, or collapsed onto the floor in a puddle of tears. But I did not feel like crying. My demanding career had trained me to separate my personal emotions from the scene playing out in front of the lens. You observe, you analyze the subjects, you find the focal point, and you execute the plan. Bradley and Simone were completely unaware of their audience. They were trapped in their own narcissistic bubble, whispering sweet, validating praises about their beautiful new family. I listened to my husband tell my best friend how strong she was, and how she had finally given him the one thing he had always wanted. The implication hung heavy in the air. She had given him what his infertile, broken wife could not. I pushed the heavy oak door open. It swung inward silently on its well-oiled hinges. I stepped into the room, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an absolute void. The soft click of the door latch engaging behind me was the only sound that alerted them to my presence in the quiet suite. Bradley snapped his head up instantly, his hand froze in midair, hovering just above Simone's shoulder like a statue. Simone gasped sharply, instinctively pulling the two tightly wrapped blankets closer to her chest. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost fading against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes went wide with pure terror. The silence that stretched between us was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and entirely suffocating. I did not blink. I did not shout. I simply looked at Bradley. I looked at the man I had shared a home, a bed, and a life with for the past 6 years. He stood paralyzed by shock, his jaw slightly open, his eyes wide with the sudden violent realization that his carefully curated double life had just collided head-on with reality. Then I shifted my cold gaze to Simone. She physically shrank back into the pillows, completely unable to meet my eyes. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her chest heaving under the hospital gown. She stared down at the babies, refusing to look at the woman she had betrayed in the most profound and painful way possible. I walked slowly toward the foot of the hospital bed. Every single step I took was deliberate, measured, and completely silent. Bradley opened his mouth, preparing to launch into a defensive, gaslighting rage, but the sheer freezing coldness radiating from me seemed to paralyze his vocal cords. He could not form a single word. I watched his eyes dart from my face to the folder, his confident posture crumbling. The room that had been filled with joyous whispers just moments before was now a suffocating chamber. I reached the edge of the mattress. The crisp white linens were perfectly smooth at the corners. I raised my right hand, holding the thick manila folder over the bed. I slowly relaxed my fingers and let the folder slip from my grasp. It landed on the mattress with a dull, heavy thud. The sound echoed in the quiet, expensive VIP suite, like a gavel coming down in an empty courtroom, signaling the absolute end of our lives together. The heavy doors of the family court closed behind me with a solid thud. The room smelled of old wood, an unromantic setting for the death of a marriage. I sat perfectly straight at the petitioner table. My attorney sat beside me, organizing the fast-track divorce documents. Across the aisle sat Bradley. He wore a tailored charcoal suit projecting the pinnacle of arrogant suburban wealth. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something. Bradley nodded, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across his face. He looked at me as if I were a wounded animal he successfully cornered. He truly believed he had broken me. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, flipped through the thick binder of our financial agreements. She paused, peering over her reading glasses directly at me. She asked if I fully understood the extreme concessions I had made. She highlighted my total surrender of the $1.2 million estate and the monthly alimony payments. She wanted to strictly ensure I was not being coerced into financial ruin. I met her gaze with absolute clarity. I stated for the official record that I accepted every single term. I wanted the legal severance finalized today. Hearing me concede so easily inflated Bradley's ego to a dangerous new level. He shifted in his leather chair, puffing out his chest. He looked back at the gallery where his mother Beatrice sat proudly clutching her designer handbag. Beatrice offered her son a victorious smile. They thought they had successfully punished the defective wife. They thought they had drained my resources to fund his perfect new life with Simone and the newborn twins. Bradley's lawyer tapped his gold pen against the table, unaware that he had facilitated his client's total destruction. By securing that house, they locked Bradley directly into the crosshairs of the impending federal tax lien. The judge gave me one last searching look before nodding. She picked up her heavy wooden gavel and struck the sounding block with a sharp crack. The marriage was officially dissolved. The financial separation was legally binding. Bradley immediately stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a theatrical flourish. He walked past my table, pausing just long enough to look down at me. He whispered that I should have fought harder, that I was always too weak for a real man like him. I did not engage. I simply packed my documents into my leather tote bag. The trap was fully closed. I had successfully severed my clean commercial film income and studio assets from his corrupted real estate accounts. I walked out of the courtroom and pushed through the heavy glass exit doors of the courthouse. The bright sunlight of the early afternoon hit my face. The warm air felt incredibly crisp and clean. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the absolute exhilaration of total freedom. I was no longer tied to his toxic family. I was no longer carrying the suffocating burden of his fragile, aggressive narcissism. The 30-day fast-track divorce strategy worked flawlessly. I descended the wide concrete steps, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm. Halfway down the steps, my phone vibrated intensely inside my bag. I stopped walking, stepping to the side of the stone railing to retrieve the device. The screen lit up with a secure encrypted message from my brother-in-law Jamal. Ever since that pivotal afternoon in my studio, Jamal had been my vital inside source, monitoring the family's movements while maintaining his facade as the dutiful, quiet African-American husband to Bradley's sister Rachel. I opened the message. Jamal did not waste any time with pleasantries. He had sent a single high-resolution image, followed by a brief, urgent text. The image was a digital scan of a cream-colored invitation card featuring elegant gold foil lettering. It was an exclusive invitation from Bradley and Simone. They were hosting a massive housewarming and sip-and-see party at the new suburban mansion Bradley had purchased using the stolen funds from our joint account. The invitation boasted about celebrating their new perfect family and formally introducing the newborn twins to the world. It was designed to be the ultimate status symbol event, a lavish display of Bradley's alpha male virility and his newfound domestic bliss. Jamal's text message detailed the extensive guest list. Bradley had invited everyone who mattered to his inflated ego. The entire homeowner association board would be there. His elite country club associates, real estate investors, and the extended family were all confirmed to attend. Beatrice had personally ensured that every single judgmental, gossip-loving suburbanite in their social circle received a gold foil envelope. They were treating this party like a royal coronation. They wanted a massive audience to witness their triumph and validate their toxic choices. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. Bradley was voluntarily assembling the exact audience I needed. He was gathering every single person he desperately wanted to impress into one confined, manicured backyard. He wanted a public celebration of his legacy. He wanted to parade those twins around to prove his biological superiority. The sheer arrogance of his plan was truly breathtaking. He was setting up a magnificent stage, unaware that he had just handed me the perfect location for his total annihilation. A slow, cold smile spread across my face as I stood in the bright sunlight. The financial ruin I orchestrated with the tax lien was safely ticking away in the background, but the public reckoning over his fake paternity was about to take center stage. I locked my phone and slid it back into my leather tote. I had the pediatric archive folder secured. I had the undisputed medical proof of his permanent sterility. Bradley wanted a grand theatrical spectacle to show off the children he thought were his own. I decided right then and there to attend that exclusive suburban party and give him the exact public spectacle he so desperately craved. The day of the housewarming party arrived with flawless, bright sunshine illuminating the pristine streets of Bradley, newly purchased reality. Driving my Tesla through the towering wrought iron gates of the exclusive Oakwood Reserve, I navigated a neighborhood meticulously designed to project generational wealth. The suburban landscape was a masterpiece of homeowner association enforcement. Every massive oak tree was perfectly pruned. Every sweeping emerald lawn was flawlessly manicured. Wide paved driveways showcased collections of imported luxury vehicles heavily polished and gleaming under the cloudless sky. It was a suffocating fortress of absolute conformity, where superficial appearances dictated your entire social worth. I parked a block away from the massive colonial estate Bradley had secured using our stolen savings. The sheer scale of the house was a desperate monument to his inflated ego. Walking down the quiet sidewalk, the faint sound of a live jazz quartet drifted over the tall, manicured hedges. I approached the open side gates leading to the sprawling backyard. I did not walk in immediately. I stayed hidden behind a massive wall of climbing white roses, observing the meticulously choreographed performance playing out across the expansive green lawn. Bradley had spared absolutely no expense for his grand debut. A professional catering team drifted seamlessly through the crowd of high-profile guests, balancing silver trays loaded with seared scallops, caviar, and crystal flutes of imported champagne. The backyard was arranged like a set for a luxury lifestyle magazine. Huge white floral arrangements cascaded from stone pillars, silk linens draped elegantly over cocktail tables. In the center of the patio, an elaborate multi-tiered cake stood as a monument to the newborn twins. The guest list was a calculated collection of everyone Bradley desperately wanted to impress. I recognized his wealthy real estate investors, men in expensive polo shirts, gripping whiskey glasses, and nodding at his business boasts. The country club elite stood in tight clusters, their wives comparing diamonds and exchanging forced, practiced smiles. Beatrice held court near the catered buffet, wearing a pale yellow designer suit. She looked positively radiant, accepting compliments from the HOA board members as if she had personally birthed the twins herself. She paraded around the patio completely intoxicated by the validation of her peers. Simone floated through the wealthy crowd wearing a flowing white sundress, playing her part flawlessly. She smiled demurely, accepting lavish gift bags and posing for endless social media photos. She carried herself with the smug satisfaction of a woman who believed she had successfully secured a permanent spot in the upper echelons of suburban royalty. Standing quietly near the edge of the patio, far away from the center of attention, was Jamal. He held a glass of sparkling water, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with sharp, analytical precision. Dressed in a sharp, casual linen suit, he projected a relaxed demeanor, but I could see the profound tension radiating through his posture. He checked his watch discreetly. Jamal knew exactly what was resting inside the red leather envelope tucked securely under my arm. He knew that this entire spectacular display of wealth and arrogance was built on a massive biological lie. He watched his wife Rachel laugh loudly with Simone, utterly disgusted by his own family toxic complicity. Jamal took a slow sip of his water, silently bracing himself for the incoming explosion. The gentle music from the jazz quartet faded away as Bradley stepped up onto the raised stone terrace. He grabbed a silver spoon and tapped it firmly against the side of his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the murmuring crowd. The wealthy guests turned their attention toward the patriarch of the hour. Simone hurried over to stand right beside him, pushing a highly expensive double stroller positioned perfectly for everyone to see. Bradley beamed. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, puffing his chest out to command the space. "Thank you all for coming today," Bradley announced, his voice booming with arrogant confidence. "We brought you all together to celebrate a massive new chapter. As a real estate developer, I spend my life building strong foundations. I build properties meant to last for generations. But as any successful man knows, the greatest thing you can ever build is your own legacy." The crowd murmured in polite agreement. Beatrice clasped her hands together, staring at her son with absolute adoration. "For a long time, my foundation felt unstable." Bradley continued, his tone dropping into a mockingly somber register. "I was stuck in a situation that was completely broken. Sometimes you invest years into a project only to realize the ground beneath it is totally barren. You realize it can never produce anything of real value. I had to make the difficult choice to cut my losses and walk away from the failures of my past. I had to find a partner who was actually capable of building a real future." A few of the country club wives exchanged knowing, scandalous glances. They knew exactly who he was talking about. He was publicly tearing me down, painting me as a defective, barren failure to elevate his own status. "But a true alpha always finds a way to succeed," Bradley bragged, throwing an arm around Simone. Simone stepped into the light and gave me the ultimate gift. She gave me my bloodline. She gave me a son and a daughter who will carry my name and inherit the empire I am building. This house, this beautiful family, this is what a real man deserves. Let us raise a glass to strong genes, a perfect future, and the absolute power of the Bradley legacy. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Glasses clinked in the warm afternoon air. Cheers rang out across the manicured lawn. Bradley looked incredibly smug, drinking in the validation of his elite peers. He leaned down to kiss Simone, looking like a victorious king standing over his conquered territory. The applause began to settle down. The quiet chatter of the party slowly resumed. I stepped out from behind the wall of climbing white roses. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, gripped the red leather envelope tightly, and walked directly onto the open stone patio. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my designer heels against the polished stone immediately drew the attention of the guests closest to the garden entrance. I walked with absolute, unwavering purpose. My eyes were fixed entirely on Bradley. The glorious, self-satisfied grin on his face was about to be permanently erased. Every single second of his cruel public humiliation was about to rebound with catastrophic force. The camera was rolling, the lighting was absolutely flawless, and it was finally time to deliver the definitive, undeniable truth to the entire gathered crowd, exposing the massive biological lie he so proudly paraded today. The sharp, rhythmic sound of my heels against the stone patio acted like a sudden strike of lightning in the middle of a calm summer day. One by one, the wealthy guests turned around. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Crystal champagne flutes paused halfway to perfectly painted lips. I stepped fully into the bright afternoon sunlight, letting the warm rays catch the deep crimson fabric of my tailored silk dress. I had chosen the color deliberately. Red was bold, unapologetic, and commanded absolute attention. It was the exact opposite of the meek, broken woman Bradley had just described to his elite audience. The crowd of real estate investors, country club wives, and homeowner association board members parted before me like a parting sea, creating a clear, unobstructed path directly to the center of the terrace. I kept my chin high and my shoulders pulled back, projecting an aura of total, unshakable power. I did not glare at anyone. I did not look angry or bitter. I wore a serene, almost pleasant smile that completely unnerved the onlookers. Whispers began to ripple through the manicured backyard. The wives leaned into their husbands, their eyes darting between my immaculate appearance and the newly minted parents on the stage. They were expecting a hysterical ex-wife arriving to throw a tantrum and ruin the celebration. They were bracing themselves for a messy, embarrassing display of raw emotion. Instead, they were watching a predator calmly stroll into the territory, fully in control of the hunt. Beatrice was the first to physically react to my presence. The pale yellow designer suit she wore seemed to suddenly swallow her frame. Her jaw dropped and she took a frantic step toward her son, her hands trembling as she clutched her expensive handbag. She knew exactly what I was capable of, and my serene entrance terrified her far more than a screaming match ever could. Rachel stood a few feet away, her mouth open in silent outrage, completely paralyzed by my sheer audacity to crash their perfect suburban debut. Standing near the buffet, Jamal simply swirled the ice in his glass of sparkling water. He did not smile, but a subtle nod of deep respect passed between us. He was ready. I ignored the panicked gasps and the frantic whispers echoing across the patio. I kept my eyes entirely locked on Bradley. His triumphant, arrogant grin evaporated the second he registered my presence. The color drained from his face, replaced by a flush of hot, defensive anger. He instinctively stepped in front of Simone, puffing out his chest to shield his new family from the perceived threat. Simone shrank behind his broad shoulders, gripping the handle of the double stroller so tightly, her knuckles turned a stark, alarming white. Her lifestyle influencer facade completely crumbled, exposing the terrified, guilty opportunist hiding underneath. I reached the raised stone terrace and stopped exactly 2 feet away from Bradley. The entire backyard had gone completely, utterly silent. You could hear the gentle rustle of the oak leaves in the summer breeze. Every single high-profile guest, every investor, and every nosy neighbor held their breath waiting for the explosion. I looked up at Bradley, meeting his furious blue eyes, with a gaze as cold and hard as a diamond. I brought my hands forward. Resting on top of the red leather envelope I had carried from the car was a sleek, perfectly flat box. It was wrapped in heavy, matte black paper and tied with a pristine silver ribbon. It looked incredibly expensive, resembling a gift from a high-end boutique. I extended my arms, offering the beautiful box directly to him. I heard you were celebrating your brand new legacy today, Bradley, I said. My voice was loud enough to carry across the quiet patio, hitting the ears of every single person eagerly watching the drama unfold. It was smooth conversational and entirely devoid of any hostility. I felt it was only appropriate that I bring a housewarming gift, a small contribution to the brilliant future you are building. Bradley stared at this black box as if it contained a live, venomous snake. His chest heaved with angry, uneven breaths. He wanted to yell at me. He wanted to order his hired security to drag me off the lawn, but he was trapped by his own massive ego. He had just spent 10 minutes boasting to the most important people in his social and professional circles about how he was a dominant, untouchable alpha male. If he panicked now, if he threw me out, or refused to accept a simple, elegantly wrapped gift from his ex-wife, he would look incredibly weak. He would look terrified. He would lose the absolute respect of the wealthy investors standing just a few feet away. "What is this?" Caroline Bradley hissed, keeping his voice low so only Simone and I could hear the venom dripping from his words. "Are you really so pathetic that you had to crash my party to beg for my attention?" I did not break eye contact. I kept the black box extended toward his chest. "It is a gift, Bradley," I replied, projecting my voice slightly louder so the country club elite could hear my polite tone. "It is a very special piece of history, something that perfectly explains the true strength of your genetics. You should really open it. Your guests are all waiting to see what I brought for the happy new father." Bradley clenched his jaw so tightly I could see the muscle twitching under his skin. He glanced nervously at his investors, who were leaning in, completely captivated by the unfolding spectacle. He looked over at Beatrice, who was frantically shaking her head silently, begging him to throw the box away. But his massive pride completely overrode his mother's desperate warning. "Fine," Bradley scoffed, ripping the sleek box from my hands with an aggressive snatch. "Let us see what desperate little stunt you brought today." Bradley tore the silver ribbon away with a single aggressive pull. The delicate fabric fluttered to the stone patio floor, instantly discarded. He lifted the lid of the matte black box, his face twisted in a mocking sneer. He reached inside and pulled out the thick stack of papers. The top document was the yellowed pediatric archive from 2003. His brow furrowed in genuine confusion as his eyes scanned the faded letterhead. He had anticipated a fake sonogram, a pathetic love letter, or perhaps some desperate plea for reconciliation. Instead, he was holding his own childhood medical history. He held the paper up, tilting it to catch the bright afternoon sunlight. "Let us see what elaborate fiction you have constructed today," he announced to the crowd. His voice projected loudly across the completely silent manicured backyard. He cleared his throat and began to read the text aloud, fully intending to turn the contents into a massive joke for his elite audience. "Patient Bradley, aged 12, severe viral infection resulting in mumps or chitis." He paused, stumbling slightly over the complex medical terminology. "Bilateral testicular inflammation resulting in profound and permanent cellular damage." A few of the wealthy real estate investors standing nearby exchanged bewildered, uncomfortable glances. The country club wives leaned closer, their expensive champagne glasses completely forgotten. Bradley let out a harsh, dismissive laugh, shaking his head. He still did not fully grasp the absolutely devastating implication of the clinical words he was casually reading aloud here today. "You brought me my childhood medical records," Bradley scoffed. "Are you trying to prove that I was sick in the 7th grade? This is beyond pathetic, Caroline. Even for a bitter ex-wife, this is a spectacular new low." I kept my posture entirely rigid and my expression completely calm. I slowly gestured toward the stack of papers resting in his hands. "Keep reading the documents," Bradley when I instructed, my voice cutting cleanly through his arrogant laughter. "Read the official results from the exclusive fertility clinic we visited exactly 3 years ago. Read the diagnosis the specialist gave us on the very day you decided to take a business call in the hallway instead of sitting beside your wife." Bradley rolled his eyes, heavily flipped the yellowed pediatric page to the back. and revealed the crisp white stationery of the Los Angeles fertility clinic. His eyes darted to the top right corner, registering his own full legal name and date of birth printed in bold black ink. He began to read aloud again, his tone dripping with thick theatrical sarcasm designed to amuse his friends. Seminal analysis results for patient Bradley. Test 1 0 sperm count. Test 2 absolute 0 sperm count. His loud booming voice suddenly faltered. The mocking cadence vanished completely, rapidly replaced by a sudden sharp intake of breath. The dark words printed on the medical page were no longer a funny joke. They were a definitive execution of his entire masculine identity and his precious legacy. His eyes raced desperately down the page, absorbing the final diagnostic conclusion written by the top fertility specialist in the state. He read the words aloud, his voice dropping into a hoarse whisper that miraculously managed to carry across the hushed audience. Patient is 100% sterile due to permanent damage sustained during childhood mumps infection. It is a confirmed biological impossibility for this patient to ever father a child through natural conception. The thick paper began to tremble violently in his hands. Bradley stared blindly at the bold black letters, his brain frantically trying to reject the horrifying information. He slowly looked down at the expensive double stroller where the newborn twins were sleeping peacefully. He then looked up at Simone. She had backed away until her hips hit the edge of the stone buffet table. Her face was a frozen mask of absolute paralyzing guilt and sheer terror. The brutal realization hit him with the destructive force of a freight train. If the medical documents were real, the children he had just proudly claimed as his ultimate bloodline were completely unrelated to him. His initial shock rapidly metastasized into a blind, highly defensive rage. His face turned a deep, alarming shade of crimson red. He crushed the clinical medical documents in his fist, crumpling the crisp white paper into a tight ball. He raised his strong arm and pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my face. "This is a complete malicious fabrication," Bradley roared, yelling loudly. He turned frantically to address his elite guests, desperately trying to salvage his rapidly shattering public image. "She forged these documents. My bitter ex-wife printed these fake medical records because she is insanely jealous that I found a real woman to give me a perfect family." He waved the crumpled papers wildly in the warm summer air, his angry voice echoing violently across the expansive lawn. "You actually think you can march into my home and ruin my legacy with a pathetic lie?" Bradley screamed, taking a highly threatening step toward my position. "Look at my beautiful children. They are entirely mine. I am a virile, strong, successful man. I built this massive real estate empire, and I built this perfect family. You are absolutely nothing but a defective failure trying to destroy the profound happiness you could never provide. I am the true father of those newborn twins. I officially claimed them. They share my superior blood." His unhinged, desperate shouting echoed off the massive brick walls of his luxury estate. He was aggressively demanding that his entire audience believe his frantic delusions over the cold clinical facts. But the silent crowd did not move to support him. Instead, an eerie, profound shift occurred. While Bradley screamed, the guests stopped looking at his red, furious face. Every single pair of eyes naturally drifted toward Beatrice, the one person who knew the exact horrifying medical reality of his past, ultimately confirming the absolute undeniable truth of my medical documents. Beatrice stood frozen near the catered buffet table, the warm breeze tugging gently at the hem of her pale yellow designer suit. The collective gaze of the Homeowner Association Board and the country club elite shifted from Bradley and his crumpled medical papers directly to her powdered face. The protective maternal mask she had worn for 35 years was violently stripped away in an instant. All color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. The crystal wine glass slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the polished stone patio with a sharp crash. The shattering glass sent a spray of expensive red wine across the toes of her designer shoes, mimicking the sudden catastrophic destruction of her carefully curated suburban kingdom. The loud sound of those breaking crystals snapped the heavy silence of the backyard. Bradley stopped his frantic waving. He slowly turned his head, his chest still heaving with defensive rage, and looked at his mother. He expected her to immediately jump to his defense. He expected her to loudly condemn me, to call security, to assure the wealthy investors that his ex-wife was simply a bitter pathological liar. He needed her to validate his alpha male reality. Instead, he saw a woman completely overcome by the absolute terror of being caught in a massive, decades-long deception. Beatrice could not maintain eye contact with her son. Her eyes darted frantically around the patio, seeking an escape route that did not exist. The crushing weight of the truth she had hidden since his childhood was finally suffocating her. She had built her entire social standing on his perceived perfection, and now that foundation was completely dissolving in front of the most important people in her social circle. She looked at the crumpled medical documents in his fist, then at the double stroller, and finally at Simone, who was still cowering against the buffet table. In a moment of pure, unadulterated panic, Beatrice lost her ability to maintain the elaborate lies. Her mind short-circuited under the immense pressure of the public exposure. She raised a shaking hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at Bradley and stammered the ultimate devastating truth. She asked if Simone still had not told him about that. The words hung in the warm summer air, heavier than a physical blow. The collective gasp from the country club wives was audible. The real estate investors shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were witnessing a catastrophic personal implosion. The domino had finally been tipped, and the chain reaction was absolutely unstoppable. Bradley stared at his mother. The deep crimson flush of anger on his face rapidly drained away, leaving him looking sickly and pale. The gears in his mind, previously jammed by denial and narcissism, suddenly lurched forward. He looked down at the crumpled medical papers in his fist. He slowly uncurled his fingers, staring at the bold black letters spelling out his permanent, irreversible sterility. He then looked back at Beatrice. The horrified, guilty expression on her face confirmed every single clinical word on that page. She knew. She had always known. The realization hit him with a physical force. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes scraping awkwardly against the polished stone patio. If the pediatric records were real and his own mother had just inadvertently confirmed they were absolutely real, then his biological reality was a total dead end. He was completely sterile. He had been sterile since he was 12 years old. He could never father a child. His eyes slowly dragged away from his mother and locked onto the luxury double stroller resting a few feet away. The two newborn twins were sleeping peacefully, completely oblivious to the fact that their existence had just shattered an entire suburban empire. Bradley stared at the swaddled infants. The math was brutally simple, and the conclusion was entirely inescapable. If he was 100% incapable of producing an heir, then the children he had been proudly parading around all afternoon absolutely could not be his. The legacy he had just boasted about to his wealthy investors was a complete fiction. The biological imperative he had used to justify destroying our marriage was a total sham. He turned his gaze toward Simone. She was pressing her back hard against the edge of the table, her knuckles white as she gripped the stone edge. She was trembling violently, her breathing shallow and frantic. She looked like a trapped animal desperately searching for a way out of the slaughterhouse. Bradley stepped toward her, his posture no longer that of a dominant alpha male, but of a man whose entire universe had just collapsed. His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and trembling, with a terrifying mixture of disbelief and dawning rage. He demanded to know what she had done. He demanded to know whose children were sleeping in that stroller. Simone opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, desperate sob escaped her lips. She could not form a single word of defense. She had spent the last 10 months playing the role of the devoted, fertile partner, securing a luxury house and a wealthy lifestyle by exploiting his massive ego. Now stripped of the lie, she had absolutely nothing left to offer him but betrayal. I stood my ground, my posture relaxed, observing the utter destruction of his reality. He had called me a defective woman. He had discarded our marriage because he felt entitled to a perfect bloodline. He had strutted across this patio, demanding the respect of his peers for a biological feat he was completely incapable of achieving. Now the wealthy neighbors and the homeowner association board members were watching him realize that his new life was built on a monumental, humiliating lie. The absolute silence of the crowd was a heavy, suffocating blanket of public shame. Bradley was drowning in it, and the cold, hard truth was pulling him straight to the bottom. A deliberate set of footsteps echoed across the stone patio. Jamal stepped out from the periphery of the stunned crowd. He walked with the calm, measured authority of a seasoned corporate attorney entering a courtroom he already owned. The wealthy guests parted for him instinctively. Rachel watched her husband with wide, uncomprehending eyes. She reached a hand out to stop him, but Jamal completely ignored her. His focus was entirely locked on the man who had spent years treating everyone else like disposable assets. Jamal stopped right next to me, standing shoulder to shoulder in silent, unyielding solidarity. In his right hand, he held a thick gray legal file. It looked remarkably similar to the medical folder Bradley had just crumpled. Jamal looked out at the sea of elite suburbanites, the homeowner association board members, and the high-profile real estate investors. He commanded the space, effortlessly forcing every single person to witness the final dismantling of the Bradley family illusion. Jamal raised the gray file, letting the afternoon sunlight catch the crisp edges of the paperwork. "You demanded a legacy," Bradley Jamal announced, his rich, deep voice cutting through the thick summer air with absolute clarity. "You wanted an heir so desperately that you were willing to destroy your marriage and publicly humiliate a fiercely loyal woman to get one. But you were so blinded by your own arrogant narcissism that you never stopped to ask a single logical question. Your massive ego completely convinced you that you were untouchable." Bradley lifted his head. His blue eyes were bloodshot and completely unfocused. He stared at Jamal, his chest heaving, as he struggled to draw oxygen into his panicking lungs. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a massive cliff waiting for the final push. "I am a lawyer," Bradley Jamal continued calmly. "I do not deal in assumptions, and I certainly do not deal in convenient miracles. When Caroline told me about the medical reality of your permanent sterility, I knew there was a massive missing piece to this puzzle. So I did what I do best. I launched a quiet, comprehensive investigation into the woman you just bought a luxury house for. I looked deep into Simone's background and her finances." Simone let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She pressed her hands flat against the stone buffet table behind her, pushing her body backward, as if trying to merge with the brick wall. Her glamorous lifestyle influencer persona was completely eradicated. She looked like a terrified, cornered fugitive. Jamal opened the gray file and pulled out a stack of printed financial records. He held them up for Bradley and the surrounding crowd to see clearly. "Simone was never looking for a family," Jamal stated, his voice ringing with undeniable authority. "She was looking for a highly profitable exit strategy. My private investigators tracked her movements thoroughly. 10 months ago, right around the time these children were conceived, Simone was engaged in a very passionate, very reckless relationship with a local personal trainer." The country club wives gasped collectively, their hands flying to their mouths in sheer unrestrained shock. "This personal trainer is completely broke," Jamal explained, tossing a financial summary onto a nearby cocktail table. "He is drowning in extreme credit card debt and dodging a mountain of unpaid personal loans. He could never fund the luxurious, high-status lifestyle Simone desperately craved to maintain her social media image. She knew that having a baby with a financially ruined gym employee would instantly destroy her entire fake brand. She needed a wealthy target to foot the bill for her extravagant lifestyle. She needed an arrogant, wealthy man who was desperate enough to claim a child without asking questions." Jamal pointed a firm finger directly at Bradley's chest. "You were the absolute perfect mark, Bradley. Simone used your own toxic masculinity as a weapon against you. She observed your desperate obsession with proving your virility. She watched you belittle Caroline for years over a fertility issue that was entirely your own fault. She knew you would never demand a paternity test because claiming those twins instantly validated your inflated ego. She used your own desperate arrogance to secure $1 million suburban estate and a lifetime of guaranteed financial support. The entire backyard watched the perfect family implode in spectacular, agonizing real time. The elite guests, the very people Bradley had invited to witness his supreme triumph, were now front-row spectators to his ultimate degradation. The whispers stopped, completely replaced by a heavy, judgmental silence that felt more violent than any shouted insult. Simone shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. She opened her mouth to deny the accusations, to spin another elaborate web of lies, but no sound emerged. The undeniable truth trapped her completely. She took another terrified step backward, nearly tripping over the wheels of the expensive double stroller holding the oblivious newborn twins. She looked wildly at the crowd, searching for a single sympathetic face, but found absolutely nothing except cold disgust. Bradley stood frozen in the center of the manicured patio. The crumpled pediatric records fell from his trembling fist, landing softly on the warm stone floor. The devastating reality of Jamal's words crushed the very last pillar of his false reality. He had thrown away a fiercely loyal wife. He had stolen from his own joint savings account. He had humiliated himself in front of his most important business partners. And he had done it all to finance a luxurious life for another man's children. His legs simply gave out. The physical strength he had boasted about just minutes earlier completely evaporated. Bradley collapsed. His knees hit the hard stone patio with a heavy, sickening thud. He slumped forward, his hands pressing flat against the ground to keep his torso from hitting the floor. The proud alpha male was reduced to a broken shell of a man, kneeling helplessly in the ruins of his deception. Jamal crouched down slowly, his linen suit creasing as he lowered himself to eye level with the broken man on the patio. The festive jazz music was long gone. The only sound remaining in the expansive, manicured backyard was Bradley taking short, ragged breaths. Jamal did not place a comforting hand on his brother-in-law. He kept his physical distance, maintaining the clinical, detached posture of an attorney delivering a final, inescapable verdict. He held the gray legal file loosely in one hand, resting his forearm across his knee. "Look at me, Bradley," Jamal commanded quietly. His voice was not a shout. It was a calm, steady directive that cut straight through the heavy summer air. Bradley slowly lifted his head. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, hanging in damp strands across his forehead. His face was completely drained of color, a stark contrast to the vibrant, expensive party decorations surrounding them. He looked up at Jamal with desperate, bloodshot eyes, silently pleading for some kind of loophole, some legal loophole, that would magically erase the catastrophic mess he had just created. But Jamal was not there to offer a lifeline. He was there to read the terms of the surrender. "Do you actually remember that hospital room, Bradley?" Jamal asked, his tone measured and precise. "Do you remember when the hospital administrator handed you that blue clipboard? You were so incredibly eager to sign those papers. You wanted to look Caroline directly in the eye and prove your absolute dominance. You wanted to make a grand theatrical show of claiming your brand new legacy. You wanted to inflict maximum emotional damage on the woman who stood by you for years." Bradley squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head slightly as the memory of his own arrogance crashed down on him. A low groan escaped his throat. "You did not even bother to read the fine print," Jamal continued, relentlessly driving the point home. "You just grabbed the silver pen and carved your signature onto an official acknowledgement of paternity. You voluntarily and legally declared yourself the father of those twin infants. You did it to feed your massive ego, completely unaware that you were signing your own financial death warrant." Jamal leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between them just enough to ensure Bradley heard every single syllable of the coming legal reality. Under strict state law, a signed acknowledgement of paternity is legally binding. It establishes you as the legal father with all the accompanying financial obligations. The state court system does not care about your bruised pride. The family court system does not care that you were manipulated by a lifestyle influencer looking for a free ride. They do not even care about the biological reality of your absolute sterility. You signed a binding government document claiming financial and legal responsibility for 2 children, and the state expects you to pay for them. Bradley let out a choked gasp, his hands balling into tight fists against the smooth patio stones. He looked wildly toward the double stroller, then back to Jamal. I will fight it, Bradley rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper. I will hire the best lawyers in the city. I will prove she lied to me. I will take this to the highest court. Jamal let out a short, pitying laugh. You can certainly try to fight it, Bradley. You can drain whatever is left of your rapidly disappearing funds to hire aggressive attorneys. But overturning a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity is an agonizing, incredibly steep uphill battle. To even attempt to reverse that signature, you will have to drag this entire humiliating spectacle into a public courtroom. You will have to put your permanent sterility on the official public record for every single person in this city to read. You will have to admit to a judge that you were foolish enough to sign legal documents without verifying the facts simply because you wanted to hurt your ex-wife. Jamal stood up slowly, brushing a speck of dust from his trousers. He looked down at the kneeling man delivering the final crushing blow. Even if you drag this through the courts for the next 3 years, the family court heavily favors maintaining financial stability for the children. They look for the established legal father with the deepest pockets. They will look closely at your real estate firm, your luxury assets, and the paperwork you willingly signed. Until a judge definitively rules otherwise, you are legally on the hook for 18 straight years of child support for 2 children that belong to a broke personal trainer. 18 years of paying for Simone to live in the luxury house you bought with stolen money. The guests murmured in shock. The reality of the financial sentence was staggering. Bradley was facing nearly 2 decades of massive monthly payments. He had trapped himself in a prison of his own making, and the bars were forged entirely from his own narcissism. He had thrown away a stable dual-income marriage with a highly successful commercial director, all to become the unwilling piggy bank for an opportunistic fraud. I stood watching the scene unfold, feeling a profound sense of closure. The universe had delivered the exact consequence Bradley required. I did not need to scream or cry. I did not need to ruin my own peace to seek vengeance. I just needed to let him follow his own toxic instincts straight into the abyss. Jamal turned away from Bradley and walked back toward me. We stood together on the patio looking at the wreckage of the perfect suburban facade. The catered food sat untouched on silver platters. The jazz band had packed up their instruments and quietly slipped away. The wealthy guests were already beginning to discreetly edge toward the side gates, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the Bradley family scandal. The ultimate legacy he had promised to unveil today was nothing more than a spectacular, very expensive ruin, a monument to an arrogant man who ultimately destroyed his own absolute kingdom. The weeks following the spectacular collapse of his absolute kingdom brought an entirely new level of devastation. Bradley had barely picked himself up off the stone patio before the real consequences of his arrogance began to materialize. The public humiliation at the housewarming party was merely the psychological prelude to a brutal financial execution. Exactly 42 days after our divorce was finalized, in family court, the secondary trap I had left for him officially sprang shut. The Internal Revenue Service did not operate on emotion or suburban gossip. They operated on hard data, and they had finally finished auditing his corrupt real estate development firm. The federal tax lien dropped with the crushing weight of a concrete vault. Because Bradley gleefully accepted sole ownership of our $1.2 million estate during the fast-track divorce, the government attached the massive lien directly to the property. He assumed all hidden liabilities to secure his prize. Within 48 hours of the official filing, the bank initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings. They placed a highly visible public notice right on the front door of his supposedly perfect new legacy home. The pristine suburban fortress he intended to use as a monument to his alpha male virility was suddenly branded as government property. But the federal agents did not just stop at the front door of his real estate investments. They executed a complete, uncompromising freeze on all his personal banking assets. Every single account tied to his Social Security number was locked down, pending the massive fraud investigation. This included the private checking account, where he had proudly stashed the $150,000 he stole from our joint savings. The federal auditors easily traced the movement of those stolen funds. They flagged the massive non-refundable down payment he had transferred to secure the new luxury house under Simone's name. Simone realized the horrifying depth of her mistake almost immediately. The lifestyle influencer had engineered a fake pregnancy with a broke personal trainer just to secure a wealthy provider. She thought she had trapped a highly successful real estate tycoon who would fund her elite country club fantasies forever. Instead, she received a certified letter from federal investigators naming her as a potential accessory to corporate financial crimes. The government aggressively moved to seize her new suburban house because it was purchased with commingled, fraudulent corporate funds. Her lavish lifestyle evaporated overnight. She was left holding two screaming infants in a house she no longer owned, tied to a man who literally could not afford to buy groceries. Desperate, panicked, and facing total financial ruin, Bradley turned to the only safety net he thought he had left. He drove his rapidly depreciating luxury sedan to his parents' house in the exclusive Oakwood Reserve. He barged into their pristine, professionally decorated living room, completely frantic. He needed cash to hire a criminal defense attorney. He needed a massive loan to pay off the immediate tax penalties and stop the foreclosure on his properties. He expected Beatrice and Richard to open their checkbooks and save their golden boy, just like they had done for every minor inconvenience he had ever faced growing up. Instead of open arms and deep pockets, he was met with a fortress of absolute terrified rejection. Beatrice sat stiffly on her expensive white sofa, clutching a cup of tea with trembling hands. Richard stood firmly by the fireplace, his face a mask of cold, defensive panic. The scandal from the housewarming party had already decimated their standing within the homeowner association. Their elite country club friends were actively avoiding their calls. The suburban royalty they had ruthlessly maintained for 30 years was deeply tainted by the public revelation of Bradley's sterility, the fake twins, and his spectacular cuckolding. When Bradley begged for a financial bailout, Richard flatly and ruthlessly denied him. The patriarch of the family looked at his desperate son with nothing but profound disappointment and fear. Richard explained in a sharp, unforgiving tone that transferring any substantial wealth to Bradley right now would invite the IRS to audit their own personal accounts. Richard had spent his entire life building his own suburban wealth, and he was absolutely terrified that his son's fraudulent real estate ledgers would act like a virus infecting his own pristine financial standing. They were cutting him loose to protect their own comfortable retirement. Beatrice, who had spent years enabling his toxic behavior and gaslighting me to protect his fragile ego, turned incredibly vicious. The mother who had begged me to lie about his fertility to protect his pride now looked at him with sheer disgust. She aggressively blamed him for bringing a conniving, manipulative lifestyle influencer into their prestigious neighborhood. She scolded him for being foolish enough to sign a binding legal document claiming children that were clearly not his own. The protective, loving facade vanished. When faced with the threat of federal audits and permanent social exile, the toxic family immediately turned on each other like starving wolves. Bradley stood in his childhood living room, completely abandoned by the people who had raised him to believe he was an untouchable king. He argued, he shouted, and he pleaded for just enough money to retain legal counsel against the IRS and the family court system. Beatrice simply instructed him to lower his voice so the neighbors would not hear his pathetic shouting. They showed him the front door, firmly telling him not to return until his legal issues were completely resolved. They exiled their golden child to preserve their fragile, fake social standing. Stripped of his money, his fake family, his career, and his parental safety net, Bradley was isolated in a dark, miserable hell entirely of his own making. The cold walls were rapidly closing in around him, leaving him with nowhere else to turn for salvation. Out of pure, unrestrained desperation, he reached for his phone to make one last truly pathetic call to the only person left, 6 months later, the heavy silence of my private editing bay had been entirely replaced by the electric buzzing energy of a massive soundstage in downtown Los Angeles. I stood at the center of a bustling $1 million commercial set, completely in my element. Dozens of crew members rushed around me, adjusting massive lighting rigs, moving heavy equipment cases, and preparing the talent for the next crucial shot. I was directing a major national campaign for a luxury perfume brand, a contract that had effectively doubled my agency revenue and secured my absolute financial independence for the rest of my life. The air was thick with creativity and purpose. I walked over to the primary camera setup, a state-of-the-art cinema rig resting on a heavy metal tripod. I leaned forward and pressed my eye against the viewfinder, peering through the expensive macro lens we were using for the product close-up. Through the curved glass of the lens, the entire world narrowed down to a single hyper-focused point of brilliant light and vibrant color. Everything else in the peripheral vision simply fell away into a soft, indistinct blur. As my fingers gently rotated the heavy metal barrel to sharpen the focus on the crystal perfume bottle, a profound sense of peace washed over my entire body. I realized in that exact moment that cinematography was not just my profession, it was the perfect metaphor for human survival and personal growth. For years, I had allowed my life to be completely out of focus. I had let Bradley and his deeply toxic family dictate my lighting cast, dark shadows over my worth and blur my personal boundaries. I had absorbed their harsh critical glare, allowing them to convince me that I was a broken, defective woman simply because their fragile golden boy lacked the biological capacity to build a family. I had stayed in the background, minimizing my own brilliant career, dimming my own light so that his fragile, arrogant ego could shine brighter. I had accepted a blurry, miserable existence because I mistakenly believed that unconditional love required total self-sacrifice and endless suffering. But the absolute truth about film editing is that you cannot salvage toxic, corrupted footage. You cannot apply a magic filter to fix a scene that is fundamentally broken from the very first frame. You have to be ruthless. You have to take the sharpest blade you can find and completely cut away the dead weight. You have to slice through the gaslighting, the financial abuse, and the constant emotional manipulation to reveal the clean, vibrant picture hiding underneath. That is exactly what I did. I dropped the heavy manila folder on that hospital bed and I called cut on the most miserable production of my entire life. I stopped trying to fix a man who was actively trying to destroy me. I handed him the exact rope he needed to hang his own false legacy, and I simply walked off his set forever. Today, my reality is sharper and more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. I am completely free from the suffocating grip of the homeowner association gossip and the relentless, cruel judgments of Beatrice and her country club friends. My bank accounts are secure, fortified by my own relentless hard work and the brilliant, unwavering legal protection provided by Jamal, who recently left his toxic marriage and took a prestigious partnership at a major corporate firm. Jamal and I grab coffee occasionally, sharing a quiet, knowing smile about the spectacular downfall of the people who thought they could manipulate us. Bradley is currently drowning in a dark, inescapable ocean of massive tax penalties and mandatory court-ordered child support for two children who share absolutely none of his DNA. Simone is stuck living in a cramped budget apartment, her luxury influencer dreams completely shattered by federal asset seizures. They are both trapped in the agonizing, bitter consequences of their own boundless greed and breathtaking arrogance. They thought my empathy was a weakness they could easily exploit for their own financial and social gain. They learned the hard way that a woman who knows exactly how to control the light also knows exactly how to plunge her enemies into total permanent darkness. I stepped back from the camera rig, giving a firm nod to my lighting director. The setup was absolutely flawless. The subject was beautifully illuminated, and the background noise was entirely silenced. I took a deep, refreshing breath of the cool studio air, feeling the undeniable thrill of total ownership over my own destiny. I had successfully framed the perfect shot, and the future looking back at me was incredibly bright. The pain of the past was nothing more than discarded film on the cutting room floor. I had claimed my power, protected my wealth, and built a life that no arrogant man could ever tear down. Every morning I wake up in a home that I own, a beautiful modern sanctuary, unburdened by secrets, lies, or federal tax liens. I sip my coffee in total peace, knowing that the empire I am building belongs solely to me. There are no more hushed whispers, no more manipulative relatives demanding. I shrink myself to fit their suburban mold, and no more fake friends seeking to steal my joy. I am the sole architect of my happiness, and I will never let another person hold the pen to write my story. True freedom is not just escaping the trap. True freedom is recognizing that you always had the key to unlock the door yourself. My lens is clear, my vision is set, and my legacy is my own absolute independence. I am finally living the vibrant, brilliant life I was always meant to live. Have you ever let someone use your empathy as a weapon against you? Share your story in the comments section below and hit subscribe. If you believe the best revenge is simply moving safely on. The most profound lesson woven throughout Caroline's journey is the absolute necessity of ruthless emotional editing. In life, just as in the intricate art of cinematography, we are frequently conditioned to believe that every flawed, blurry, or corrupted frame can somehow be salvaged if we just apply the correct filter or try hard enough to fix it. We end up absorbing the toxic narratives of those around us, willingly dimming our own vibrant light to accommodate the incredibly fragile egos of people who refuse to take any accountability for their own darkness. Caroline's ultimate victory was not born from explosive rage, tearful pleas, or dramatic public screaming matches. Instead, her magnificent triumph stemmed from the quiet, immense power of stepping back and observing the horrific scene with chilling, objective clarity. She recognized that her deep empathy and unconditional loyalty were being actively weaponized against her. The crucial turning point occurs when we finally stop trying to heal the exact people who are intentionally breaking us. True liberation requires the monumental courage to take the sharpest possible blade to our own life's script and permanently sever our deep ties to manipulative gaslighting environments. When we stop desperately fighting to maintain a fake, perfect picture, we officially reclaim the director's chair. Letting go of a highly destructive relationship is never a sign of weakness or pathetic defeat. It is the absolute ultimate act of self-preservation. By actively stepping out of the agonizing theatrical drama and focusing purely on the undeniable truth, we completely strip our abusers of their power. The dark shadows they cast can no longer define our personal worth once we choose to step fully into our own light, curating a brilliant reality on our terms. Have you ever had to ruthlessly edit toxic people out to reclaim your focus?